Hey y'all! So today we're going to be finishing up the 4th stage in the 14th chapter of Women Who Run with the Wolves. And just a reminder, the 4th stage is called Finding Love in the Underworld. And it was pretty long, this section here. So we're splitting it into 2, and today is the last half of that section. So I just hope that you're doing well today, and I hope that you are excited to dive in with me, because I'm very excited to be here with you and sharing all this with you, and I love to always hear your thoughts on the content. So okay, I'm going to go ahead and start by rereading just a tiny snippet of where we left off last time, just to kind of set our minds. She says, our work is to interpret this life-death life cycle. That's important to remember, okay? Interpretation. Our work is to interpret this life-death life cycle, to live it as gracefully as we know how, to howl like a mad dog when we cannot, right? Like in private, appropriately, and to go on. We have to be relentless, in our pursuit. And to go on, for ahead lies the loving underworld family of the psyche that will embrace and assist us. I would say this is another parallel truth, right? Because as we're relentless in moving forward with our pursuit of consciousness and awareness, and wisdom and all those things, yes, the family characters that symbolize the different parts of our psyche will start to come forward and make themselves known through our search, so that we can understand how our mind works, so that we can have better control over it, and be in the driver's seat of perceiving everything that's going on out in the world, interpreting everything correctly, not according to like conditioning and our past or misunderstandings and things like that, but truly translating everything in our present the right way. Because if we don't, it can cost us. It can cost us beautiful connections, and possibly love. So it's pretty important. And I also want to say, as far as the parallel reality here with this statement, when she says, and to go on, for ahead lies the loving underworld family of the psyche, like I was talking about, that's one. And then the second would be, also ahead lies the loving underworld family, period. Meaning, this is how I see it, meaning not your blood family, your family by DNA, by blood, but your spiritual family, the family that has also been through hardships, and who has done the work like you're doing, and who has also made a trip to the underworld and come back out on the topside world just like you have, so that it's a special connection, that you understand one another, and you're walking the path with one another. In other words, you're finding your people. You see what I'm saying? And that's also what lies ahead for us. The family here, meaning understanding how the mind works, so that we can get a good grip on it, and operate appropriately going forward. And the family truly in the topside world, who has also taken that trip down to the underworld just like you have. Okay, so yes, so I just thought that was beautiful, and I think I just kind of skimmed over it towards the end of the last video. I just had to revisit that and share that with you. So I hope that's inspiring for you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and dive in. If you have the, and there may even be different editions, I'm not sure, but I'm on page 425 if you're following along in the hardcover here. So, all right. She says, the king helps the maiden live more ably in the underworld of her work. And this is good, for sometimes in the descent, a woman feels less like an acolyte and more like a poor monster who has accidentally strayed from the laboratory. Yeah, when we go through this process and we we're questioning everything, our perceptions, our paradigms. Everything just feels kind of shattered, you know, and we're trying to put the puzzle pieces back. You can feel like a mess, absolutely. And I'm saying that from experience. So I love how she describes it so colorfully here, more like a poor monster who is accidentally strayed from the laboratory. From their vantage point, however, now she's talking about the king, right? And the people from the underworld, from their vantage point, however, the underworld figures see us as a blessed life and struggle. Yes, because you know why? Because they've been there. They've been there. And so they have left the topside world themselves, right? Symbolically or truly. By underworld sights, we are a strong flame beating against a dark glass in order to break it and be freed. Yes, yes. And all the helping parts there in the lower home rush to support us. So it's an acknowledgement of this psychological battle that we are engaged in. You know, it's like that's what's happening here. And so all these parts and pieces of our psyche, or in real life, the people who have been there rushing to our side, you know what I'm saying? Because they've been there, they've been wounded. And those are the ones that are going to help you heal more than anything, because they get it, you know what I'm saying? And also on the symbolism spectrum here, the parts of our psyche are going to be rushing forward. And it's, to me, symbolic of just that acknowledgement that it is a psychological struggle or battle. She says, in olden times, woman's descent to the underworld was made in order to marry the king. And she says, in some rites, R-I-T-E-S, there seemed to be no king, and the acolyte probably married the wild woman of the underworld directly. And here in the tale, we see a remnant of this when the king takes one look at the maiden and immediately, without faint heart or doubt, loves her as his own. He recognizes her as his own, not in spite of her handless, wildish, wandering state, but because of it. Because of it, right? Yes. The theme of being so without and yet so sustained continues. So it's that divine paradox, right? You have to lose to gain. Even though we wander about in an unwashed, forlorn, semi-blinded and handless state, a great force from the self can love us and hold us to its heart. And that's self with a capital S, the higher self. Women in this state often feel a great excitement, the kind a woman feels when she has met a mate who is so much of what she has dreamed of. It is an odd time, a paradoxical time, for we are above ground and yet below ground. We are wandering, yet we are loved. We are not rich, yet we are fed. So it's a refinement of what matters, you know what I mean? Not taking anything for granted, I think too. It's a big part of it. In Jungian terms, this state is called the tension of the opposites, wherein something from each pole of the psyche is constellated at one time, creating new ground. So I view that as like, instead of it being black and white thinking, it's coming, you know, bringing all of it together and saying maybe the truth is a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You know, it's an expansion again. I love looking through that lens of expansiveness. So, and Freud, I can't pronounce that, Sigmund Freud, in that psychology, it is called a bifurcation, bifurcation, wherein the essential disposition or attitude of the psyche is divided into two polarities, black and white, good and bad. Among storytellers, this state is called twice born. It is the time where a second birth occurs through a magical source, and whereafter the soul now lays claim to two bloodlines, one from the physical world and one from the unseen, the world unseen. The king says he will protect and love her. Now the psyche is more conscious. There will be a marriage, a very interesting one, between the living king of the land of the dead and the handless woman from the land of the living. A marriage between two such disparate parties would test the most magnificent love between two people, would it not? That's what she says. So then she's giving examples from other tales, Cinderella, she says the Cinder Girl and the Prince, the Woman and the Bear, the Young Girl and the Moon, the Seal Maiden and the Fisherman. So there's all these different examples. She says the soul takes on the knowing of each entity. This is what is meant by being twice born. In fairy tale marriages, as in ones in the topside world, our world, the great love and union between dissimilar entities may last forever or only until a lesson has been completed. In alchemy, the marriage of opposites means that a death and a birth will soon take place, and soon we shall see these in the tale. The king orders for the maiden a pair of spirit hands, which will act in her behalf in the underworld. It is in this phase that a woman becomes adroit in the journey, or I would probably say adept. Her submission to it is complete. She has gotten her footing, as they say, and also her handing. To have one's handing in the underworld means to begin to learn to summon, direct, comfort, and appeal to the powers of that world, but also to ward off its unwelcome aspects, such as sleepiness and so forth. If the symbol of the hand in the topside world carries a sensory radar of others, because remember we talked about that in the last video, the symbolic hand of the underworld can see in the dark and across time. So I love this. Remember, the king has the maiden made a pair of silver hands. So to me, this is symbolic of her reaching a certain level of psychic maturity. And if you look back, you can kind of deepen this understanding and the grasp of this concept by remembering that she got into this whole predicament because that gatekeeper aspect of our psyche, in the story it would be her father, she got into this whole predicament because of his lack of understanding, because he misinterpreted the deal with the devil, the offer from the devil. Remember, he thought he was just trading in the apple tree and that was it, but she was back there too, and the devil was really slick, and he's like, let me just have what's behind your shed back there. And he's like, well, it's just the apple tree, right? So it's all about this this lack of understanding, a misinterpretation. And so at this point, the symbolism of her receiving the silver hands is like an acknowledgement of getting a good grasp on things, understanding, wisdom, interpretation, being able to see clearly, that born again, having the eyes to see. There's so many different lenses you can apply to this stage of development here. And I also want to take this one step further. This was kind of in my pondering over this. I wrote, and now she can take things at the surface level, because see, that's what liars do to us, people who are trying to manipulate us, like a narcissist. They're presenting one thing to you, and then like your alarm bells are going off, like hey, pay attention, and we're just in this fog. So at this stage we're talking about is where we can take things at the surface level or the topside world, and then we can translate them through our new underworld abilities or underworld insights. So instead of just taking things at face value, we can stop and pause and evaluate and apply this new understanding and say, hang on, I think there's a hidden motive here. You see what I'm saying? So it's just going to prevent this whole, bargain with the devil again from happening through ignorance or being naive. So I hope that just kind of gives you some things to think about. And then she goes into talking about symbolism through different cultures with regard to silver and gold and even wood. And she's mentioning gremlins and elves, and it's just really interesting. She kind of just gives a summary here and there throughout the whole book about different myths and fairy tales. And she says, as in all things of the spirit, the silver hands carry both history and mystery. And then she gets into a story with Zeus. And I'm not super familiar with the Greek gods, all those myths and everything. But it's kind of interesting here and there to read about it. So there's Zeus and then his wife Hera. They had a son, Hephaestus, and it talks about that. So what happened was, it says Hephaestus and the maiden with silver hands are archetypally brother and sister because they both have parents who were unaware of their value. And so when Hephaestus was born, Zeus, being his father, demanded that he be given away. Okay, and I'm sure there's, like, if you really get into the myth, there's going to be different versions, and there's going to be a lot of elaboration on this and everything, but we're just simplifying for our purposes, right? So Zeus is like wanting him to go away at least until he's born. He's grown. And so his mother, Hera, complies with this, right? And it says, then she restored Hephaestus to Olympus. Okay, so he becomes this goldsmith and silversmith, and they say of astonishing abilities. So it says he went on to make all manner of magical things and became a god of love and mystical restoration. So he developed these abilities because when Hera, his mother, it says, restored him to Olympus, and he became so adept at these skills, these goldsmith skills, his father Zeus got jealous. And so what happened was he threw him down, and it says down to the foothills, shattering his legs. But even though he was crippled, he refused to give up and die. And that's what really, gave him the motivation to become this god of love and mystical restoration, they're saying, right? Because he actually made himself a pair of legs from silver and gold. So there's just a little, backstory to that. That myth there. It says he can be said to be the patron of those things and humans that are dismembered, split, sundered, cracked, chipped, and distorted. He has a special love for those who are born crippled and for those whose hearts or dreams are broken. So she says, it is not by accident that the one-eyed, the lame, those with withered limbs or other physical differences have through time been sought out as possessing a special knowing. Their injury or difference forces them early on into parts of the psyche normally reserved for the very, very old. And this just triggered in me the thought that, you may consider yourself an old soul. Have you heard that term? Or there may be people in your life you've met or have friends that you just feel like they're an old soul, like early on in life. I definitely think that going through hardships can cause that perception of people or perception of yourself, trauma, because you are changed. You're suddenly, you've gone through this process that we're reading about in this book, at that point. And so, it qualifies you to help others. Now you're a wounded healer, which she's going to talk about here in a minute. And sometimes that's the only thing that will help a person, is somebody who's been there and gets it. So she says, to be given silver hands is to be invested with the skills of spirit hands, with the healing touch, the ability to see in the dark, the ability to have powerful knowing through physical sensing. They carry an entire psychic medica with which to nurture, remedy, and support. At this stage, the maiden is invested with the touch of the wounded healer, right? Like Hephaestus, right? These psychic hands will cause her to better grasp the mysteries of the underworld, but they will also be retained as gifts once she completes her work and ascends again. It is typical of this portion of the descent that the uncanny, odd, and healing acts occur that come from outside the will of the ego and that are the result of being given spirit hands, that is, a mystical healing vigor. In old times, these mystical abilities belonged to the old women of the villages, but they did not gain them at the first gray hair. They were accumulated over the years of this work of endurance, and that is what we too are about. Yes. All right, she says the hands of silver, you might say, represent the maiden's coronation into yet another role. Now, I'm reminded of Elsa from the Frozen movies here, so if you want to keep that in mind as we read. And remember, her powers came from her hands, remember? And she would just point sometimes, and she was just horrified at the power that would just shoot out from her hands before she had matured in her abilities and in her gifts. And so she didn't have good control over that, right? And so she would wear gloves, and the gloves would kind of just keep that power contained for her until she went through all the processes and lessons that she did in those stories, where she didn't have to wear gloves anymore, right? So it's again that process of maturing. So just keep that in mind, okay? So it says, the hands of silver, you might say, represent the maiden's coronation into yet another role. She is thus crowned, not with a crown upon her head, but with silver hands at the ends of her arms. This is her coronation as queen of the underworld. Yes. To apply just a little more of paleo mythology at this point, let us consider that in Greek mythology, Persephone was not only a mother's daughter, but also the queen of the land of the dead. Yes, so these stories, these myths, just change form, but ultimately it's the same story, the same wisdom to be gained if we just remain relentless in that pursuit, you know. Then she goes into talking about, you know, other stories and the symbolism of apples and blossoming trees and all this. She says, this is an ancient cryptology. And so we learn to read it is what happens, right? We learn to see those symbols and to understand what they mean. And she says, we see that fairy tales and mythos have left us a clear map to the knowings and the practices of the past and the way for us to proceed in the present. So she says, now here at the end of the fourth labor of the handless maiden, we could say the maiden's work in the descent is complete, for she is made the queen of life and death. Or I would say she has embraced that cycle, the life, death, life cycle. You know, she gets it. She understands it now. She's lived it. She is the lunar woman who knows what passes in the night. Even the sun itself must roll past her underground in order to renew itself for day. But this is still not the resolution. We are only at the midpoint of transformation, a place of being held in love, yet poised to make a slow dive into another abyss. And so we continue, and that sets us up to go into the next section here. So we see that there's a process, right, that we have to go through. But we see that it's worth it, right? Because if we don't hold tight to being relentless in our pursuit and being patient through the process, right? We can't hurry through it. It's just not, we're going to miss things and misinterpret. And so it's kind of like it has to happen in its own time. So there's a bit of surrender there. But if we give up, then the darkness wins and we remain forever broken. You know what I'm saying? Which is what the darkness wants. And so we don't want to just surrender to that. We don't want to just give up and surrender and be broken. That's no way to live. Because life is meant to be lived, and it's meant to be lived to the full. So I just hope that you are patient with yourself through this process, whatever stage you're in. I hope that you're encouraged. That's my goal, is to encourage you, to bring you good things to think about, and to show you that all throughout history, people have faced similar challenges. You know, the human heart is what it is. And I feel like that's why, as it's described in the Bible, for example, you know, those truths that are in the Bible never change. They're unchangeable. And so these lessons through the Bible and also through these myths are still relevant today. They just take different form, you know. The story may just be modified to suit our modern times, you know, or there may be snippets taken out and put in cartoons and things like that. So, but the lessons are still there. And the choice for humanity, for a person in this topside world to take, you know, the route of embracing the light and being a vessel for good, or for the darkness, that choice is always there. That free will is always there. And the ones of us who choose the light are still going to have to share this world with those who choose the darkness. And so we're just learning how to navigate, and we're learning how to look deeper into things and not take things at the surface level, so that we're not fooled, so that we don't remain broken, so that we can heal ourselves and help to heal one another through walking the path together. And I just hope that that you are encouraged, and I hope that I've given you a lot of good things to think about. And feel free to share your thoughts. I always love to hear them, and I just thank you so much for coming along today with me. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I will see you again very soon.